So hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here with a very special guest today, BookTube's own Matthew of Mayberry Book Club. Welcome, Matthew.
Hello. It's so nice to be able to talk with you.
Nice to meet you via Zoom.
It's incredible. We couldn't be farther apart on the planet right now.
Yeah, you're in the States near Baltimore.
Yep, East Coast. Yep.
And I'm in Tokyo, so yeah, we're pretty far apart. How long have you had your channel, Matthew?
I started my channel about a year and a half ago. I think it's a little bit more than a year and a half now.
And tell me about the name. How did the name Mayberry Book Club? I've not seen any book club activity on your channel, but maybe I've missed it. Do you have a book club?
Well, I sort of do. So one of my very favorite television shows is the Andy Griffith Show. It's a fictional town called Mayberry. The sheriff is Andy Taylor with his deputy, Barney Fife. And when I moved into my house here, I got a little cat friend, and his name is Andy Taylor. And when I would sit down to read in the evenings, my little cat would come up and curl next to me to keep me company. And I kind of had this idea that me and my cat, Andy, were the Mayberry Book Club. So the name came from an extension of the fact that my cat likes to sit with me while I read.
Well, that is maybe the sweetest thing I've heard all year. I'm not a cat person, but that's just like, Doris, I hope you're watching. Do you know Doris of Aldi Books?
I do. I watch her videos. I don't think that it's interactive.
Well, her vlogs are very catty. There's lots of cats in her videos. And did you say your favorite show is the Andy Griffith Show?
I love it. I've been watching it over and over for years.
So I just have to say, your tastes in TV programs kind of mirror your tastes in reading. You are an old soul, aren't you, Matthew?
I tend to read a lot of old books. That is true. I think there's a couple good reasons. As time goes by, it's much easier to get a hold of the good stuff. And the other great thing is when everybody's already dead and you find a writer that you like, you get to immediately read everything they've ever written. I've had experiences where I'll find a new writer that I love and I'll read 2 books and then find out that I have to wait a couple years while the person's actually writing. And so that's a source of frustration that's missing from someone that was writing 100 years ago.
Now, that's interesting because I have also heard readers complain about the opposite, which is that they can never get another one by a dead writer. Like once you've read their oeuvre, you're done. Whereas a living writer, you can kind of hope there might be another one coming.
That's a good counterbalance.
But you do mostly read dead writers' books, don't you?
Yeah, I would say 80 to 90, maybe well over 90% of my typical reading is older books. And kind of unfortunately, I do find myself more often disappointed with contemporary books that I read. Not all the time, but I sometimes feel like there's a lot of new books. I'll pick them up, and it's a 200-page book that has big print, large spaces between the lines, wide margins, and even with all of that, it feels unsatisfying, where if the whole thing was condensed into what would fit the format of a Penguin classic, I'm almost looking at either a novella or a long chapter's worth of material.
Glorified short story.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of novels, the way that it's packaged balloons it up to make it seem as if it's a more substantial piece of work, just lengthwise, than it actually is.
So you like tomes?
I do. I'm actually, next month in November, I'm going to be reading The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann for the third.
For the third time?
Yeah, I have.
Wow. I am so attracted to that book, but then the last person that talked about it to me said it was a philosophical novel, and immediately I pulled back. What do you think? I don't like philosophical fiction. I mean, I don't mind if there is a philosophy that's imparted through richly drawn characters, living their lives and being in the story, and I can draw some philosophical conclusion from watching them do all that. But if it's dense, if it's actually more philosophical than that, I don't think it would be for me. What do you think?
It's certainly a philosophical novel. It's an accurate description of the book, but it has a really great framework. It's this person, our main character would be Hans Castor, and this is before World War One, and he has tuberculosis, and he needs to go up to a sanitarium in the Swiss Alps. So the hospital that he's going to is the top of a mountain, and he interacts with a cast of characters. The whole entire book is set within the hospital, so it's all the other patients and the doctors, visitors. It's all of these people sort of shuffling around in a situation where every day is made to be like every other day, just the way it is in a hospital. Like they have the same exact routine. And this person is stuck there for 7 years. He only meant to be there for a short amount of time. So in that time, he has lots of conversations with the other patients. The premise and the things that happen in the hospital can almost feel like fairy tale like or a little whimsical. And it's on the opposite end of how dense and philosophical the questions can be. I would say it's not a very plot driven book at all.
Well, that appeals to me as long as I'm not reading page upon page of kind of philosophical reflections, absent of any narrative or people. That's what do you think? Because the premise, I heard years ago that it was set on this sanatorium on the side of the mountain, and I was really drawn to that as a setting. But do the characters go on waxing philosophical without storytelling for pages?
I'll say this, it's one of those books that everybody has where you love it and you'll stand behind it. And it's also incredibly difficult to enthusiastically recommend.
Okay, so obviously I need to give it a try.
I think if you get swept up into it, it really carries you along.
So two things. One is, you know, Britta Bowler's channel, and you know that she is a novelist. Did you know that she has written a novel about Thomas Mann?
Oh, no, I did not.
Okay, let me tell you about it. I haven't read it. I want to read some Thomas Mann before I read her novel. I've heard good things about it. It is called The Decision, and she wrote it, I believe, in Dutch, but maybe in German. You never know with Britta, one of those two languages. And it was translated by Jeanette K. Ringgold. The English publication, I believe, is 2016. And it is about 3 days in his life in 1936. He's in Switzerland worrying about being arrested by the Nazis, and he has to choose what he's going to do, go back to Munich or not. And it's set over those 3 days. It's supposed to be amazing. So I recommend that to you, even though I haven't read it.
That's something I can buy online.
I think so.
I'll definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, I think it might be a Matthew book. And your description, the more I hear you talk about Magic Mountain, the more it reminds me of a book. I'm reading the second in a projected trilogy, but it's the first in this series that you might enjoy, because more than half of this 500-page novel is set not in a sanatorium, it's set in the 1950s UK. The author is Adam Mars Jones, and this is his John Cromer series, and the first book in this series is Pilcrow. John Cromer was born maybe late 1940s or something, this fictional character, and he gets an illness in childhood that makes him severely disabled, and he lives the rest of his childhood in a medical institution. And it's a first-person narrative where it's all about the doctors and nurses and the people in the beds next to him. He is so completely bedridden that not much happens. And I did find it, as I was reading this 500-page novel where not much happens, I found it a bit of a slog in places, despite his very fascinating personality and observations on life. And he ends up coming out to himself in that setting. And eventually he does leave the hospital and goes to a kind of a boarding school for the disabled and graduates high school, I believe, and he actually starts to explore his sexuality, but hundreds of pages where very little happens. It was a challenge to read, and then I have not been able to stop thinking about that book ever since I finished it. So it left a marvelous aftertaste, and I am now reading the second in the series, which is him in his late teenage years, early 20s, as he's starting to enter the workforce and stuff, Sedila. But that might be something you might enjoy.
Is it not a biographical novel?
It's not. Apparently, one of my subscribers just left a comment when I mentioned that I had started volume 2, Sedila, that Adam Mars Jones said it's based on the life of one of his friends.
Oh, wow. While you're talking, it sort of at least reminds me in theme of The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Is that a book you've read?
No, I know of it. I have not read it.
I can't remember the author's name. It was written by, I believe, the editor of the French Elle magazine, a very well-established French magazine, and it's this person that was living the dream life. He was intelligent, handsome, fabulous, glamorous, at the height and pinnacle of his career. And he suffers some sort of affliction, like a stroke or something in his body just strikes him down. I think it's something like locked-in syndrome, where he's totally conscious, but his entire body is completely paralyzed, and he's only able to communicate by, or I should say, that the only thing that he's able to move is one of his eyelids. Mm-hmm. So he learns how to communicate with staff and people that visit him by blinking one eye.
Wow.
And he eventually writes a book by having someone transcribe his blinking patterns, and it becomes The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. I believe he lived for maybe 2 years under this condition, and it's one of those tragic stories where it's almost as if the act of telling his story kept him alive, and when he finally completed it, died very shortly thereafter.
I maybe knew that and had forgotten, but it does really sound powerful, and it reminds me once again of a book that I studied. It was my final graduate course for my master's in English, and it was a class on autobiography. One of the autobiographies was about a woman with a very similar challenge in her life. I Raise My Eyes to Say Yes by Ruth Sankiewicz Mercer and Stephen Kaplan. She was bedridden with her medical issue, and she would communicate just by raising her eyes. Yeah. So,
did you say that was the book that you studied in university?
It was my last course for my master's. Yeah, autobiographical literature, and one of them was this autobiography. Yeah. My memory of it was the story was really interesting as a piece of writing, maybe not so much, but The Diving Bell sounds incredible.
It was also made into a movie. I think it was a movie directed by Julian Schnabel, same director that made Basquiat, the movie about the 1980s artist.
Basquiat, yeah. So have you always been this kind of reader, reading the classics, the canonical?
Actually, I was just thinking, one of my favorite things about being able to interact with other readers through YouTube is I love the fact that you and I are, on the surface, very different readers. You read lots of books at the same time. I tend to get confused really easily and prefer to stick to one book. You read a lot more contemporary fiction. I read kind of older things. But the thing that I love is I do feel that we still have the same sort of reading sensibilities. We're still kind of looking for the same things within a book.
Interesting. I think so too, but please go on.
There's surface level things. So like maybe you prefer characters or plot or whatever, but we're both looking for that thrilling experience. And we're just sort of going different ways, finding the same thing. You know what I mean?
Sure. You have a great sense of humor, so I think you'll appreciate this. But when I looked through your channel about the things that you're reading and the titles of your videos, it's like I am such a nerdy reader. My special period of literature is like the 1930s, and and when I go through the titles of your videos, you make me look cool, Matthew.
I'll tell you something funny. I have my little channel And I have a video that has way more views than all my other videos. So it's, it's the most popular video. It's The Idiot by Dostoevsky. The thing that cracks me up, not that like it would ever happen, but the idea that at some point anyone that goes to YouTube and types in The Idiot, the first thing that would pop up would be a picture of my face. Like for all the reading and all the talking, it would all still just be reduced down to, oh yeah, The Idiot.
I don't know what to say. I loved Crime and Punishment. Don't remember it very well, but I read it 30 years ago. Maybe 15 years ago, I read The Brothers Karamazov, which I also really liked. So, has your reading tastes changed over your life, or have you always been more of a classics canonical reader?
I'm kind of late to the game, or I was anyway. I didn't start reading until maybe I was 19, 20 years old. At that point, I had a really good friend. I was very lucky to meet a gentleman when I was 19. I think he was already 65. His name was Bob. I met him at a coffee shop with his two dogs. I'm in college, and one of those idiots that sits down and says, like, well, I don't really read. He was one of the most well-read people that I've ever met. We became friends, and he was shocked and horrified. And for the years that I knew him, he made the best case to read as much great stuff as you possibly can. He would say, like, the greatest minds that have ever lived were writing things down, and it's available to you. How are you not going to take advantage of that? Like, what is your reference point in life? Just you and the three people around you? Things like that. And then he would talk specifically about the books that he loved. And he was so enthusiastic and so convincing and honest that he would talk. It's sort of, now it's equivalent to like BookTube, but we would sit at a table and he would talk for 15 minutes about David Copperfield or something. And at the end of the conversation, I would basically run to the bookstore and have to read it. In a lot of ways, I sort of kept up the sensibilities that he imparted on me.
Interesting. You read a lot of classics, a lot of the canon, and maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but this is Victober. So this is the month that I hone in on Victorian literature. And I don't remember seeing a whole bunch of Victorian writers or books.
That's still a pretty big gap in my reading. There are some of my favorite writers of Victorians, I suppose. I like Thomas Hardy. I like Dickens. Because of Steve Donahue, I have started reading Anthony Trollope, which has been a joy. But yeah, there's a lot of Victorian writers that I haven't even touched.
Oh, me too. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot at all. I just was noticeable to me because in terms of classics and the canon, that's kind of where my reading has been focused. So it's very interesting that your reading has taken you in different directions. Have you read much 19th century American writers?
One of my favorite writers just across the board, one of the authors that would make a list is Herman Melville.
All right.
Most of that weighs on just Moby Dick, but some of his short stories are so different and odd and funny. One of my favorite short stories is Bartleby the Scrivener.
Now I have read that. Yes, I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, like it has that mixture of...
I prefer not to.
I prefer not to. Yeah, it's just great. And the ending turns extremely tragic. It's not just a funny little throw-off story. This past year, I've been reading a lot of Walt Whitman.
Okay.
And it's the Deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. I do find myself picking it up several times a week to spend time with Walt.
That's awesome. I had a poem of his read by one of my best friends at my wedding a couple years ago.
Oh, wow.
I chose the poem, and yeah, my friend read it.
What was the poem?
Good question. It was called When I Heard at the Close of the Day. And it fit perfectly the fact that I was somebody that was in the middle-aged guy finally getting hitched, and there was a lot about it that spoke to me. So
a difference between us that I enjoy is I like that you kind of do background research. things. You have the pop-ups and corrections. And when I started my channel really early on, I made a decision not to do any research or preparation at all. And my thinking was, I want to try to present the stuff that I know as accurately as possible.
Mm-hmm.
All the mistakes, all the gaps of knowledge go in. And it helps me interact with people that are watching, because I make mistakes and then people comment and go like, well, this was incorrect, or you're mispronouncing things. And it feels more like a conversation over a table.
Well, I don't think we differ too much, other than that I sometimes check things out as I'm editing and we'll put a textual correction or whatever, yes. But definitely, I make tons of mistakes. I just made a joke in my Friday Reads last night that I need that CNN fact checker, the one that's always fact checking Trump. He's got glasses and he's talks a mile a minute. You need to talk a mile a minute to fact check all the lies that Trump tells. And I said, I need him, because I'm always saying, oh yeah, this is her debut. And it's like, no, it's not her debut. So yeah, I'm kind of relaxing about that too. And I do a series about words, vocabulary, that I do my best to present my research. That I'm limited to researching what I can find online. And then I think the best part of that series, where I talk about kind of more linguistically focused videos about words, is what happens in the comment section. So you're reading the Makioka sisters, and apparently I had some influence in that decision, which makes me very happy.
Yes, I believe it's been several times you've mentioned and enthused about this book. And I think, I might be wrong about this, but I think you said it was even a surprise to you how much it was a Shawn book.
Yes, and I think I call it it's my favorite Japanese novel, definitely, hands down.
And I'm loving it. So far, it feels like a hangout novel. I feel like it's like these sisters in a house. There's a lot of time spent with them just sort of interacting with one another and acting like sisters, sometimes bickering, sometimes sweet, helping each other change. It's a very strange thing, because so far not really much has been happening.
No,
but it's
it is not a plot-driven novel. And the characters are so richly drawn, because you're not needing to follow much of a storyline for hundreds of pages at a time, but what you're getting is just ever deeper sense of who these sisters are and their spouses or whatever. Yeah.
I recently read, there's a scene where the sisters, or the family, the Japanese family, were having like a dinner party with these Russians.
Neighbors?
Yeah.
Yes, I remember the Russian neighbors.
And so like they're all sitting down, and the Russians are like just drinking like glasses of vodka, bottles of vodka. They're eating all this food, and the Japanese women are kind of shocked and like stupefied by the amount of consumption that's happening at the table. I thought it was so funny, but also like really well drawn and not cartoonish. It had a really perfect pitch of the situation.
Yes, my memory is a little bit more dim about the multicultural aspect of the novel, but that is a very important part of the novel. You are right, and it's sometimes often told in a comic way. The other comic thing that was so fascinating to me is, I think it was wasn't it the eldest sister and her husband that lived in Tokyo? Because the other sisters are in Osaka. No, Kobe. I think Kobe. Maybe I think they actually go back and forth. But anyway, they're in the Kansai district, and the eldest sister and her husband are in Tokyo. And because the parents are dead, the husband of the oldest sister is kind of the patriarch of the family, and they don't like him, but he is the one who must make the final decisions about absolutely everything. And these sisters that are living elsewhere, Kobe or Osaka, they're grown women, but the patriarchy of the society, that they must appeal to him and the eldest sister, who they almost never meet. We do meet them at a certain point for a brief time in the novel, but for the most part, it is just letters back and forth. And the way that the remoteness and the grumpy resignation that they have to appeal to these people to get permission to do anything is that they're not referred to as brother-in-law and eldest sister. They're referred to as, I think if I'm remembering correctly, as Tokyo. Like there's no love lost between these people, and just the way language is used to convey that. And I don't think I'm remembering it quite exactly, maybe not Tokyo, but the Tokyo branch or something. And it's like, it sounds like it's interdepartmental memo rather than family communication. It's a wonderful novel. I loved it so much. How far are you into it, Matthew?
I'm about 160 pages in.
I read that one very slowly. That was one of the novels that developed me as a slow reader. I read it over maybe 3 months, and that was the right pace for a novel that was that.
I'm surprised the pace that I'm reading the book. For longer works or anything that takes multiple sittings, my reading tends to accelerate. I'll start off kind of slow, and as I get my bearings and feel like I know the world that I'm in, I know the people that I'm interacting with, I can just kind of read faster and faster. And it feels less and less like reading. I can just have kind of pictures in my head. And for this book, without any additional thought, it's not like I'm trying to do anything. My reading pace has just stayed in one gear the whole time. It's such a lovely book to spend time with that I don't mind it at all. It seems like a book that I'm going to have to read slowly, as if the author is like doing things to purposely make sure that I do.
That's right. Well, I am going to be so interested to follow your progress with that. Have you read other Japanese writers?
I have. This past year, I read Breasts and Eggs by, I can't remember her name now.
Miyako Kawakami.
Yeah, I believe that was the last Japanese novel that I read. And I read something else, maybe Snow Country.
Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata.
Yeah, I loved Snow Country, and I hated Breasts and Eggs.
And then, so you and I, exact opposite. I hated Snow Country, and I didn't love Breasts and Eggs. I liked it. And I think you know how I feel. If everybody agreed on every book, it would be a very boring place indeed. But Snow Country, maybe I need to reread it, but I couldn't stand the protagonist, and I couldn't understand why all these women were falling all over themselves to be with him, because he was just so, I hated him.
It's sort of a funny story. I read it years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. I read the book, and I'm having coffee with my friend Kevin. At the time, one of my piles of things to talk about is whatever I just finished. So I'm telling him how I just read this book, Snow Country, and the first thing I say is that I didn't like it.
Okay.
Then I start telling him about the book, and we're talking about it and laughing about it. And as it's sort of coming out of my mouth, the experience that I had at the end of the conversation, we're both like kind of reveling in the story. And I had to go like, well, actually, now that I'm saying it, I guess I kind of liked it. Do you ever have a feeling like that?
Sure. And one thing that I would connect that to is my comments on the Adam Mars Jones novel Pilcrow, which I didn't not like it, but the more in that case, it wasn't so much talking about it as just letting it sit with me, and my mind kept going back to it. No, I do agree with you that sometimes the books that kind of bug me, they grow on me over time. And talking about them on BookTube or whatever with bookish friends can help with that. So did you reread Snow Country after that?
No, actually, it's one of those books that I have on my shelf that I often think about picking it up, and it never makes the top of the list. So
I have a proposal for you, and this is like a 2022 proposal, not a 2021 proposal, a 2022 proposal. That's when I would be ready to reread it, and I would love to buddy read it with you at that point. Buddy read it or read it and have a Zoom chat about it. But I won't be ready, like just in terms of I need it to let it sit and then pick it up. If we're both still around.
I'll check my calendar.
Okay. That sounds good. And how much of a rereader are you, Matthew?
I reread fairly often. Usually it's the books that I love. A good example would be like the Magic Mountain, where The first time I read it, I'm the kind of reader that I will just sort of keep plowing in, accepting that I don't completely understand what's happening, and just allow whatever sort of experience happens. I do that fairly often, and I'll have an emotional reaction to the book. And then if it's a positive experience, I want to go back and try to understand the book more instead of stopping to read footnotes or endnotes or checking things online. I don't really do that. So yeah, I do reread fairly often.
Have you ever had, to me, what prevents me from rereading my absolute favorites is that I'm worried that I'm not going to love it as much on a reread. It's never happened to me, but I have also never tried, like I have maybe my top three books. I don't know if I'll ever reread them because I just don't want that to happen. Has it ever happened for you?
Actually, just recently, I started rereading a little bit of Ernest Hemingway.
Mm.
In my early mid 20s, I went through every Hemingway book in the library, and there's a handful that became very dear to my heart. Hemingway books that I just love. Sun Also Rises, Farewell to Arms, Over the Bell Tolls. This year, I reread The Old Man and the Sea, and then I reread a handful of short stories, and my opinion had completely reversed with short stories. And I had the same feeling that you're talking about, where I have these books that I love, and I'm worried about picking them up again and finding out that I don't like them. Because I have such fond remembrances of the time that I did read it.
Yeah. But mostly it's a positive experience rereading?
For the most part. Sometimes I might not finish it, or I'll want to read certain sections or parts that I really like. Yeah, I would say it's mostly positive. I guess the other side of that is there's books that I didn't get, things didn't click right. A really obvious example is there's a handful of Shakespeare plays that I didn't really care for. And it's much easier for me to think, for someone that's basically one of the greatest writers that ever lived, there's a chance that I have more work to do on my end opposed to an inherently poorly written play. And so I will go back to things like that where I didn't really care for a Shakespeare play, but I want to visit it again because I want to enjoy it.
So Matthew, while we've been talking, I've been paying very close attention to everything you've been saying, but my eyes have been wandering all over your library. So I'm going to ask you to pull a book off the shelf that I can see. I can't see the title or anything, but I'm going to describe it to you by position and color of spine, and I want you to pull it off the shelf and tell me about it. This is, I think, second shelf from the bottom, and it's the one with the steps in front of it, and it's on a pile, and it's a thick blue book.
Oh, okay. All right.
That one. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I can guess what it is. Is that Duck's Newburyport?
That's a really good guess. It is not.
Okay. I didn't think of that when I looked at it, but...
This is The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton.
17th century, right?
I believe so. It was a huge bestseller at the time, and he worked on it.
Which pretty much says all you need to know about the 17th century, that a book about depression was the bestseller of the time. I studied excerpts of that in an undergrad course on the 17th century. I don't remember anything about it. So have you read The Anatomy of Melancholy?
I've read a significant amount of it. To me, this is one of those kind of books that I'll either keep at my nightstand or on a coffee table when I had a coffee table, and kind of open it up to pass the time. One of those books that you can open up to a random page. To me, that this book is closer to like a collected works by a poet, where I don't have an interest in reading it straight through. I just want to dabble.
So why don't you tell me to pick one that you can see just by color and shelf?
Okay, how about the tall red one on the top left of your bookshelf?
I think you might like this one. This is by the British novelist Kate Atkinson, A God in Ruins. And do you know about Kate Atkinson?
No, I don't.
She is contemporary novelist, very literary, although she does write mysteries as well, which I don't read mysteries. This is kind of a sequel to her novel Life After Life, which I loved. Life After Life had a kind of reincarnation theme, so the character kept dying and then being reborn, which, you know me, that kind of thing makes me really queasy, but it really worked for me.
Okay.
This novel centers on that protagonist's brother, and there's none of that woo stuff at all in this. This is just a realistic novel, and I read it at the beginning of this year, and I really liked it. Maybe not quite as much as Life After Life, but I loved it. 5 stars. And it is about Teddy. So Ursula was the woman, his sister, who was the protagonist of Life After Life. They were young adults at the time of World War II. So both of them lived through all of that. And this guy, Teddy, he was a pilot in the war and stuff and lived to be a very old man. And it's just about his life. It's really, really good. I think you might like it.
Yeah, it sounds intriguing.
Kate Atkinson is an incredible writer. So thanks, Matthew.